Greetings for history enthusiasts. Welcome back to HistoryTube, where we delve into the corridors of the past to uncover the intriguing stories that shaped our world. I'm Shane, and today, we embark on an exploration into the enduring legacy of one of history's most iconic figures, Alexander the Great. Before that, I hope you have watched my last two episodes about the another two great characters of the history, Cleopatra and Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, let's move to the new episode, Alexander the Great. Macedonia 357 BC. The Kingdom of Macedonia solidified itself day by day as the most prominent military control within the European. Beneath the authority of Philip, the moment of Macedon and realm was picking up shape. The Macedonian lord had fair hitched the wonderful Olympias, a part of the regal family of Epirus. The youthful Lord Philip had established himself firmly within the continuously unsteady Macedonian position of royalty. Expansive portion of his forerunners had been killed amid the perpetual control battles, in spite of his firm position on authority. Philip did not have and discuss, and so he spared no endeavors to conceive a child alongside his unused spouse. Olympias was a lady with exceptionally unconventional propensities for the Macedonians at the time, and an admirer of religions and intriguing customs such as the religion of Dionysus. One night, Olympias had a dream in which Zeus tossed one of his effective lightning jolts against her paunch. In another night, Philip caught his spouse exposed, twisted and trading caresses with a gigantic serpent. They say that on that night the ruler gotten the visit of Zeus himself, who entered in her room masked as a serpent. He enticed the ruler and impregnated her. After fulfilling the mission of impregnating his spouse, Philip chosen that it was time to grow his domains and went to war. Months passed and Philip kept his war endeavors lively. The king was sieging the city of Judea on that day. 3 couriers arrived from distinctive routes, but the vital messages to the Lord. Coming from Thrace, the primary flag-bearer educated that the Macedonian common Parmenion had accomplished a decisive victory over the Illyrians coming from the city of Olympia. The moment flag-bearer detailed that the king's horse had been the champ of the Olympic diversions. The third flag-bearer was Rupella, the capital of the Macedonian realm, and brought the news that Olympias had given birth. And the child was. With this 3 news, the Lord was overpowered with joy and requested the association of an awesome party to celebrate the occasions. The child was born on a summer evening, and on the same day, distant from there in Ephesus, the incredible sanctuary devoted to the goddess Artemis, considered one of the 7 ponders of the old world, burned down in blazes. No one knows for beyond any doubt the reason of the fire. But they say that the sanctuary burned down since the goddess Artemis had withdrawn to Pella to observe the birth of a child who would overwhelm the known world. The title of this child was Alexander. The little Alexander, child of Lord Philip, the moment of Macedon with the ruler Olympias of Epirus, was a relative of a heredity indeed nobler than what it showed up to be. His father's family was a relative of the celebrated legendary legend Hercules, and on the mother's side he had in his veins the blood of Achilles, the awesome legend of the Iliad. Nothing less than a great future was anticipated for this child, beneficiary to the position of royalty, a Macedonia. The starting of his childhood was not exceptionally diverse from any respectable child of that time. But the careful look of ruler Olympias did not miss a single development of the boy. The mother and child bond was very solid, but in spite of all the warmth and care she gave to her child, Olympia dodged to ruin a child as well much, ensuring that he would not gotten to be a delicate and gutless grown-up. The nearness of Alexander's father was seldom seen, since the Lord was continually truant, extending his domain. Before long after Alexander's birth, Philip went with his armed force to a military attack. He was wounded and finished up days in one eye. Individuals said that the wound was a discipline of Zeus, who rebuffed the ruler for having spied the union between serpent-formed Zeus with ruler Olympias, but missing at whatever point he returned domestic, Philip went through portion of his time with his child and instructed him things he regarded vital for the childhood of an incredible lord and common. Alexander went through the days at the side, the children's descendant of the most noteworthy Macedonian respectable ancestry, with whom he made bonds of fellowship and believed that would final until his passing. Among them was her doctor, who had gotten to be an indivisible companion of Alexander. These youthful children were taught by Leonidas, the mentor, and their adjutants instructed military expressions, music and verse. Amid that period, Alexander fell in a door with Homer's Iliad, which describes the adventures of Greek heroes amid the Trojan War. Amid their plays, Alexander continuously needed to be the legend. Achilles, his removed relative. A duplicate of Homer's work was his voyaging companion all through his life. One day, Leonidas, Alexander's tutor, taught him the importance of respecting the divine beings and inquired Alexander to burn incense in respect of the divine beings. Alexander took a modest bunch of incense and was reprehended for that.
"What do you think you're doing, boy? This is extremely expensive. When you have conquered the incense-producing kingdoms in Asia, you may use all the incense that you want. But for now, you will burn just one."
As in Grown Up and after prevailing all of Persia, Alexander sent an expansive incense box to his previous guide with the taking after message.
"I'm sending you this large shipment of incense and myrrh, and I hope that, from this day on, you will stop being petty with the gods."
After annexing 2 rich gold mines to his empire, Philip II inaugurated a cycle of wealth and prosperity in Macedonia. The Macedonian court started to have access to luxuries never before seen in those lands, and this abundant wealth lured traders from several places in the ancient world. One of those traders was the Greek Philoneus. He was a famous horse dealer in the region of Thessaly. This region was famous for its powerful horses and horsemen. Philoneus offered to Philip a magnificent black horse. It was a huge stallion. Its powerful muscles indicated the magnitude of the animal's strength. Phil loved horses and was interested in the animal. The young Alexander was also there watching and memorized by the majestic parade of the black steed. But when they decided to put the harness on the animal, it was untamable. One of the most experienced riders of Philip tried to mount the animal and was thrown to the ground almost immediately. The horse fought the men who tried to tame him, and then, Philip said,
"Regardless of how impressive this animal is, if it cannot be mounted, then it's useless for me,"
and dismissed the trader. At that point, the young Alexander intervened.
"No, please, I want it for me."
"Don't you see that even the most skilled riders failed to tame him? It is useless and costs a fortune."
"Father, you cannot lose this invaluable horse just because these men cannot control it. Let me try to mount it, and if I can, it will be mine."
The noble laughed at the audacity of the young prince of Macedon, but Philip noticed a flame burning in the eyes of his son and agreed that he tried. Some of the nobles tried in vain to dissuade Philip of his decision and mentioned the risk of having the sole heir to the Macedonian throne ending up with his neck shattered due to his attempt. But both Philip and Alexander had already made their decision. Alexander realized that the animal was extremely ferocious because it was scared of its own shadow on the ground. So the boy slowly approached the animal and touched it slightly, turning it towards the sun. It could no longer see its shadow when the animal appeared to be calmer. All those around remained quiet, amazed by the scene. Then Alexandra, in one move, jumped on the horse and firmly held the reins, preventing the horse to fight against him. Little by little, Alexander started to release the reins, allowing the animal to start to walk. And soon they were galloping at full speed, much to the astonishment of those around as they ran. Alexander felt that he had found a partner for life. When they returned, Alexander received a standing ovation, with those present shouting his name. His proud father ran to embrace his son, who had just come down from the horse, and told him,
"Alexander, my son, you must find a kingdom that will do justice to your dimension. as Macedonia is too small for you.
As promised, Alexander received the black horse as a gift. Alexander, noticing a white bull shape on the stallion's forehead, decided to name it Bucephalus. The partnership between Alexander and the cephalus lasted for almost his entire life. Riding that glorious animal, Alexander would conquer almost the whole known world. The King Philip of Macedon was always seen as a barbarian by the Greeks, and that hurt him. Philip realized that day by day, the impetuous boy Alexander was becoming more like him, and that his Macedonian tutors, albeit devoted, would not be able to shape the son he had envisioned, and their efforts would just create yet another barbarian Macedonian in the eyes of the Greeks. For that reason, the king spared no efforts to hire the renowned philosopher Aristotle to be responsible for Alexander's formation. Philip ordered the reformation of his palace located in Mysa, which was served as Aristotle's school, where Alexander and other children of the Macedonian nobility will be educated. The Phaesgen, Ptolemy, Seleuciones, among others, where some of those students, Alexander's friends, Aristotle, taught them lessons and morality, logic, arts, medicine, among several other knowledge. But the great philosopher also lectured exclusive classes for the heir to the throne. Alexander was sometimes stubborn and resistant to studying, which he often considered tedious. But Aristotle was always able to guide him towards the path of virtue, using his persuasion.
Why do I have to sit here in the class, while the others spend the afternoon enjoying themselves?
Each one has a place in this world. Unlike you, they were not intended to guide the future of an entire nation. Remember this: education has bitter roots, but its fruits are sweeter than honey.
Aristotle was aware of his pupil's impetus and taught him the importance of a harmonious and balanced life.
Tell me, Alexander, what is the most important virtue for a soldier?
Courage, of course.
Very well. But what happens if a brave warrior decides to abandon his formation and face the enemy's army all by himself?
He'd surely die.
Because bravery in excess does not turn that into an act of courage, rather a reckless act. And so the excess of courage is a vice and not a virtue. But what would happen to that same man if he decided to contain his courage and started to fear too much for his own life?
He'd be a coward.
Precisely. And that is why it is important to always find the middle point. And so, you will find balance.
Alexander had a profound admiration for Aristotle, and for years he received the best education that the prince could have. Meanwhile, Philip achieved victory after victory, hence expanding the Macedonian Empire. Learning about his father's achievements in the field of battle, Alexander said,
My father is conquering everything in front of him. I'm afraid that nothing will be left for me to conquer when my time comes.
Aristotle was aware of the young man's greatness and did the best he could to make him a wise and virtuous man. But Alexander was no longer a child. He was 16 years old, already a man, and his father called him to assume his responsibilities in Pella, the Macedonian capital. Alexander had already reached adulthood, but he still lived with his friends in the Mysa palace. Tutored by Aristotle, he shaped him to be much more than a conqueror like his father, turning him into a philosopher king. One day, the arrival of Philip's entourage, the father of Alexander and Lord of Macedonia, is announced. He then addressed Alexander and Aristotle.
Aristotle, thank you for all the work you have done to form a man that no Greek will find a reason to call a barbarian. But now the time has come to deliver him to the world. My lord, I ask you just 1 year more. He still has much to learn. I understand your concern, but the hardness of life is also a teacher with valuable lessons to give.
Alexander went with his father, checking the condition of his army. The young prince was excited. The time to combat alongside his father in the battlefields had finally arrived.
Alexander, I introduce you to the Hetora, the king's companions. This is the elite group of the Macedonian cavalry. and now I give you the command of the most feared cavalry regiment in the world.
The companions were comprised of children of the aristocracy and held the positions of greater prestige in the Macedonian army.
Alexander, I want you to understand that our phalanxes are like anvils, and the cavalry is the hammer, which, with their powerful attacks, can tumble any enemy down.
After receiving the command, Alexander is greeted by his new regiment, which comprised a large share of his childhood friends who were also part of his personal guard. The tensions between the Greeks and Macedonians had reached its limit. However, the arrangements did not happen as Alexander anticipated. The Athenian statesman Demosthenes had assembled a few Greek cities to handle the Macedonian risk, and his brute ruler Philip chosen to go to war.
My son, you will not be able to join me in this campaign because I have a mission for you. You will sit here as the regent of the throne of Macedon during my absence.
But father, I've waited my entire life for this moment. You cannot deny me this. Your secretaries can very well manage the kingdom while you're absent.
I understand your disappointment, but it's vital that everyone knows that my rear is properly protected by someone whom I totally trust, because conspirators are certainly ready to exploit any breach.
Before his departure, Philip gave the royal seal to Alexander. Now the young prince ruled Macedonia as interim king, and his word was law. Alexander started to deal with the kingdom's administrative matters and had to act as a magistrate. His mother, the Queen Olympias, tried to expand her own power by influencing her son in some decisions. This started to tarnish Alexander's reputation with people, saying that the region of Macedonia was actually ruled by a woman. The Illyrian tribes, a historical enemy of the Macedonians, realized that with the departure of Philip and his armies and with the boy on the throne, the perfect moment to attack and weaken Macedonia had come. But they were not ready for Alexander's counterattack. The young ruler gathered all the soldiers who were not with his father and marched to face the army of looters. These were crushed by the Macedonians, and Alexander still conquered part of their territory. There he settled the colony and baptized it with the name Alexandria. When he returned to Pella, the capital of the Macedonian Empire, a messenger informed him that King Philip had required his presence in his campaign settlement. The war against the Greeks was not going as planned, and Philip was forced to retreat.
I'm here, father of mine. I became aware of your setback, and that you had to stop your offensive.
My son, we Macedonians are like sheep. We only retreat to hit even stronger. And that is why I called you, because together we will unleash the blow that will end these damn Thebans and Athenians once and for all.
Alexander was finally accomplishing his childhood dream, marching alongside his father in a military campaign. The Macedonian army sailed towards Greece. Several cities and Greek states were joining forces to halt the expansion of the Macedonian Empire's power. An unlikely alliance was formed between Thebans and Athenians, who were enemies. The most famous Athenian orator and statesman managed to mobilize part of the Greeks to face the King Philip II of Macedon. Alongside the general Chares, Demosthenes led the Athenian army to join the army of Thebes, which for years before that had defeated the mighty Spartan army. And so the Thebans were seen as the best warriors of their era. Much of the reputation was due to the famous sacred band of Thebes. This dreaded band was formed by 150 couples of homosexual soldiers, chosen among the best soldiers of Goea. These fought side by side with their partners and stood out due to their spirit of camaraderie and unshakable bravery. This band ended the Spartan hegemony, defeating them in the Battle of Electra. The Greek and Macedonian armies were facing each other on the plain of Charonia. The Greeks had approximately 35,000 soldiers, whereas the Macedonian had 32,000. Philip II led the right wing of the Macedonian army, which would face the bulk of the Athenian army. Alexander in turn led the cavalry on the left wing, confronting the dreaded sacred band. Alexander was not intimidated by that risky task, which his father had ordered him to accomplish. The battle began and the Macedonian army advanced against their enemies. The beginning of the battle was bloody, but the Macedonian phalanxes, although inferior in number, managed to contain the imperial impetus of the Greek phalanxes. Meanwhile, Alexander launched his attack, leading the cavalry of Heteroi against the Greek counterpart on the right wing. Philip's forces began to see ground to their enemies, who, feeling the taste of victory, impetuously advanced to attack. Meanwhile, the sacred band ripped the lives of those who tried to oppose them. Alexander defeated the enemy cavalry, and now Philip's brilliant strategy could be put into practice. In fact, the retreat of his men had not been assigned a weakness, but a strategy to divide the enemy line. And seizing that breach, the Macedonian cavalry maneuvered and attacked the Athenian forces from the rear. On the left flank, Alexander readied the attack against the sacred band. These stuck their spears on the ground and prepared to withstand the charge, but Alexander and his companions faked a direct attack and just threw their darts. The Thebans used their shields as defense, but most of the shields were now useless. So the Thebans had to fight unprotected. Alexander's cavalry pushed the Thebans directly against the wall of spears of the Macedonian phalanx. The battle was won. Both Thebans and Athenians fled to save their lives, except for the famous sacred band, which fought heroically until the fall of the last man. 2,000 Greek soldiers were killed, including all the soldiers of the sacred battalion, and over 4,000 were captured and sold as slaves. Philip's victory was decisive. Both the city of Athens and Thebes were on their knees before the power of the Macedonian army. After defeating the legendary band, Alexander was greeted by soldiers as the hero of the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip II and his child Alexander had constrained the Athenians and Thebans to persevere overwhelming military vanquish at the fight of Chaeronea. Tanked after the celebration of the triumph, King Philip truly moved on the carcasses of the Greeks who died on the war zone. Alexander, seeing that odd scene, reprehended his father Philip the Brute. After all, it appears to me that a few feedback made by your Athenian adversaries is in part genuine.
No matter what I do, I will never stop to be seen as a barbarian by those Greeks. But you, my son, you are different. Aristotle actually managed to shape you as a true son of Hellas.
After the fight of Chaeronea, the city of Athens was for all intents and purposes exposed and dreaded what was approximately to come another. Alexander entered the city with his escort and was gotten with ceremony and circumstance. The youthful man felt wondered by the city. Its quality outperformed all desires. There he gone to the celebrated institute where his mentor Aristotle considered with the popular logician Plato. He moreover gone to the theater of Dionysus, where the foremost celebrated studied tragedies were organized. And of course he was astounded, where he gone by the celebrated Acropolis and the sanctuary within the respect of the goddess that immersed the city. After his visit of Athens, the youthful sovereign tended to the get-together and displayed the terms of peace.
My father, King Philip II of Macedon, in a magnanimous gesture, offers you peace. The soldiers made prisoners will return to their wives. The properties and citizens of Athens will be respected, and no Macedonian garrison will remain in your territory. The autonomy of Athens will be preserved. The only condition is that Athens becomes a Macedonian ally.
The Athenians were astounded when stood up to with such generous terms, considering their frail position, and acknowledged the terms of the organization together arrangement. Philip knew the vital significance of the Athenian naval force for his plans, and thus saved the city that has continuously furiously restricted to him after such a show of quality. The ruler and the Macedonians required the nearness of all Greek cities for an get-together in Corinth. agents from each city gone to the assembly but the Spartans. Philip, at the stature of his control, offered terms to allow the Greeks to live in peace and an expansive shared resistance organization together driven by Macedonia. Philip recommended an awesome fusion between the Greek cities to require the war to the domain of the chronicled foes of the Greeks, the Persian domain. The will for exact retribution against the Persians was shown within the hearts of a few Greek generations. Individuals who for a long time held up for the opportunity to return. All the fiendish caused by the Persians amid the Greco-Persian wars. And so Philip was given the title of hegemon. Presently, the ruler of Macedonia was planning himself to perform a deed as extraordinary as those described in Homer's Iliad. Within the city of Corinth, Philip, the moment of Macedon, had fair been designated as the pioneer of the container Hellenic organization together, which was an alliance between the Greek city-states whose aim, among others, was to wage war with their Persian foes. Philip left from Macedonia to dispatch the arrangements for his horrendous military campaign. His child Alexander, enchanted with the riches of the Hellenic culture, remained in Greece for a few time. The youthful Macedonian ruler, who had been taught by the popular rationalist Aristotle, learned that the popular mastermind Diogenes Casinos lived in that city. When he was fair a boy, Alexander was interested with the stories that Aristotle had almost Diogenes the pessimist. The unpredictable mastermind driven a life of supreme severity and separation from material goods. He lived on the roads and rested interior animal dwelling place. Individuals said that he moreover had a ball which he utilized to drink water, but after seeing a child utilizing his hands as a ball, he figured it out that indeed that was superfluous for Diogenes. Men started to live falsely, which isolated them, indeed encouraged from genuine joy. He went through his days, the lamp seeking out for a fair man without ever finding one that he regarded. Settle the minute came when our virtuoso started to utilize open spaces as his restroom. When he was reprehended for that, he said that there was no reason to be embarrassed of something that's basically normal to every human being, which is why he got the epithet of a critic, a word that begun from the Greek word haenon, which suggests pooch, since the logician lived like one. Alexander learned that their virtuoso was nearby as to be taken to his nearness. On the way, one of his men told Alexander, "Master, this man may be a lunatic." When Philip's armed force drawn closer the city sometime recently the yield of the Greeks, all the individuals ran to assist to fortify the city dividers. Watching that entirety scene, Diogenes, just like the amazing Sisyphus, began to roll his barrel to the beat of the slope. And when he come to the summit, he let the barrel roll back and begun all over once more. When he was inquired the reason why he was doing such a thing, he said he felt awkward to see everybody running from one side to the other and chosen that he had to do something as well. Alexander found Diogenes laid down on his back, happy and sunbathing. The Macedonian sovereign stood before him and said,
I am Alexander, heir of Macedon and hero of the Battle of Chaeronea. Wise Diogenes, you can ask me whatever you want, and if it is within my reach, I will be happy to give that to you.
Such a beautiful body shape you have, Alexander. You actually look like the incarnation of Apollo himself, like the sun god. Can you give me sunlight?
I'm sorry, but that I cannot give you.
So, get out of my way, because you're casting a shadow.
Alexander strolled away, thoughtful, and his whole escort couldn't halt snickering at the full circumstance. Alexander looked back at him and mulled over the fulfillment of the shrewd ancient man as he sunbathed. One of Alexander's companions told him,
That Diogenes is far from sane, don't you think?
And Alexander answered,
If I were not Alexander, I would have wanted to be Diogenes.
Alexander was still in Greece when he received a letter from his mother, ruler Olympias of Macedonia. The letter's content was troubling. Lord Philip the Moment had divorced for ruler Olympias. The Macedonian respectability never saw her with great eyes, since she was a foreigner and admirer of devout ceremonies that the Macedonians regarded vulgar. Philip would make his young darling Cleopatra his new wife, who had the most elevated family of the noblest Macedonian families. Such a marriage were tied the illustrious family to all the major Macedonian families in a solid political collusion. A son of such a union would be an incredible political resource for Philip, but a great danger to the position of Alexander. After going back to Macedonia, Alexander got the news that Cleopatra was pregnant, which all the arrangements for the modern illustrious wedding were as of now in movement. Olympias filled her son's head with stories approximately how everybody was contriving to wrest his future throne. Despite some embellishments, much of what she said was genuine. The day of the royal wedding arrived and arranged to not ruin his claimed son. Philip welcomed Alexander and his mother for the wedding. The feast was filled with drinks, and most of the visitors were tanked. The wedding toast was reported. Atales, who loathed Alexander but was too Phil's faithful companion in general, raised his glass and looking at the ruler, he said,
May the gods bless this union, and let it produce a legitimate heir to the Macedonian throne.
Expended by outrage, Alexander tossed his cup against the common and would have begun a brawl in case he had not been deterred. But apparently the outrage flare-ups ran within the family's blood. Philip, outraged by his son's conduct, drew his sword and advanced against his child. Be that as it may, he was so tanked that he'd in the long run faltered into one of the easy chairs and finished up on the ground. Alexander, pointing his finger to his father, said,
So this is the man who will go from Europe to Asia? How will he do that? He cannot walk from one sofa to the other.
On the off chance that both had not been stopped in their tracks, an extraordinary catastrophe might have happened that night. The another morning, the ruler requested his son's nearness. In any case, Alexander and Olympias had as of now left towards the kingdom of Abaris, where his uncle on the mother's side, moreover named Alexander, allowed refuge. Alexander, after months in banish in Epirus, experienced a courier from Macedonia. He reported that due to the birth of Carinus, the youngest prince of Macedon, Lord Philip had announced acquittal to all those banished in exile, and so Alexander could return to the Macedonian court without having to fear any backlash. Philip knew the dangers of clearing out for Asia with a child as beneficiary to the position of authority, and so Alexander's return was fundamental for the security of his plans. In however another conciliatory move, Philip chosen to marry his daughter with his brother-in-law, the ruler Alexander of Epirus. With this collusion, his position in Europe would be strengthened, and as a reward, the wedding party would be in great part to set an affected celebration before his flight for Asia. Alexander returned to the court, and within the beginning it showed up that everything between him and his father had been set ancient. But his mother, ruler Olympias, did not fail to harm her son's intellect against his father and rivals in the court. She indeed recommended activities that will be considered a genuine selling out of the divine beings and men. Philip had just returned from the prophet of Delphi, and there he had gotten the following message.
The bull is ready for slaughter, the end is near, and the slayer is present.
Philip deciphered the message in a positive. The Persian domain was going through a civil war and subsequently was defenseless, and he would expect the part of slayer and stifle the effective realm. The day of the great wedding celebration had arrived. Dignitaries from over Greece were present to pay tribute to Philip. Alexander and the world protect were the king's defenders, but he rejected all the bodyguards and chosen to create a triumphant entrance. Alexander demanded to remain behind his father and the last mentioned.
I know that you want to appear by my side as the legitimate heir, but such demonstration is unnecessary. Why would you think that I don't see you as the future king, after having invested so much in you? But for now, leave me alone. This is my time.
Alexander strolled absent and observed his father enter the burrow that driven to the awesome theater where all his visitors were holding up. When he showed up on the other side, Philip gotten a standing applause from the swarm, and at that minute he felt like a genuine god among men. Be that as it may, one of his bodyguards snatched the knife and stuck it profoundly on the king's ribs. The killer ran absent, but he was captured and slaughtered by the illustrious watch. Alexander ran to his father. He, in his final breaths, mulled over his child, looking at him from tall over and some time recently biting the dust. He was beyond any doubt that the capable youthful man who looked more like a god would accomplish accomplishments that he might never indeed dream of, whereas everybody was still puzzled. Ptolemy and have confronted him. Faithful friends of Alexander yelled,
Hail Alexander! Long life to the king! Alexander, king of the Macedonians!
Oak branches were set on his head, which were embellished some time recently the presently expired. With that begun the rule of the youthful man who would one day be known as Alexander the Incredible. And we have come to the end of the today episode, Alexander the Great. If you found this exploration fascinating, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your fellow history buffs. And don't forget to watch my last 2 episodes and out another 2 symbolic characters in history, Cleopatra and Napoleon Bonaparte. Before you go, let us know in the comments which historical figure or period you'd like us to explore in our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time, and until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and embrace the captivating stories that have shaped our world.